This is an urgent challenge that we must face on a national level. We recognize it is not unique to Portland or our region, but this resolution and subsequent actions will be a model for the rest of the country. Western State Center commends your leadership for taking this step at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, thank you for providing us with this opportunity to testify. My name is Eric Ward. I'm the Executive Director of Western State Center. When I was a young teenager, I convinced my mother to give me this amazing t-shirt she had in her dresser. It was golden yellow and it had Oregon written across the front in green. I loved that shirt, and I wore it literally until I wore it out. It was over a decade later before I realized that it represented the late 70s colors of the University of Oregon. That shirt made me feel that Oregon was a state that fit well with my tenacious, quirky but respectful, and independent personality. While it would be more than 10 years before I would actually come to Oregon, I take deep pride in the fact that in one way or another, I've called Oregon my chosen home since I was a child. That is why I'm here before you today. I'm here to speak up on behalf of my home, Portland, Oregon. For nearly 30 years, I've worked with governments, local community groups, and national civil rights organizations, responding to bigoted movements who utilize violence and intimidation to undercut democracy and the rule of law. While discussing today how to challenge bigoted social movements, it is important to remember that white nationalism is deeply rooted in dangerous anti-Semitism. In addition, white nationalism falsely promotes the conspiracy that Jews, people of color, women, immigrants are responsible for the perceived threats to their goal of creating a white-only ethno-state. The recent Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, where 11 worshipers were killed, shows how deadly white nationalism can be when it is allowed to flourish. Where white nationalist rhetoric is allowed to be pushed into the mainstream, hate violence follows. While hate violence is widely unreported, FBI hate crime data for 2017, the most recently available, shows that hate crimes spiked 23% nationally, making it the third rise in 3 years in a row. And according to a recent report by the Anti-Defamation League, far-right extremists were responsible for every extremist killing in the United States last year. The potent combination of bigotry and violence, central to white nationalism, is a serious threat to community safety. Sadly, our region has attracted white nationalists and other racist and sexist paramilitary groups. That is because of our history and because of our demographics, but also a challenge to Portland's reputation as a progressive stronghold. These include anti-government paramilitary groups like Patriot Prayer, the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and the Three Presenters, as well as neo-Nazis and racist skinheads like Northwest Hammerskins. These groups seek to sow violence and mayhem in our community. They drain public resources, destabilize our public institutions, and threaten the safety of people of color, women, LGBTQ residents, immigrants, and religious minorities. When people ask me, as they often do, why Portland has been such a nexus for these groups, I'm reminded of a jarring moment from a Patriot Prayer rally. It wasn't an act of violence. It was a conversation between an alt-right activist and a bystander who asked him why he was there. His response struck me. He said, "You can say you don't want us here, but you're doing something we could never do. You're getting rid of your black population." He undeniably had a point. While we, the city of Portland, must draw a clear moral line against hate, we also must remember that one of the keys to our success is to address the underlying systemic discrimination that allows the alt-right, white nationalists, and others to perceive that they are welcomed in our city. That's why I'm happy we're having this critical conversation. I commend you for taking steps with today's resolution to condemn alt-right and white nationalist groups and to affirm our city's values of equity and inclusion. This resolution is significant because it recognizes the historic and current harm and trauma that both white supremacy and white nationalism has inflicted on communities of color. The resolution unequivocally rejects the organized bigotry seeking to exploit intolerance and undermine the safety and stability of our communities. It affirms our city's commitment to dismantling white supremacy in our city's policies and practices. And it commits to critical next actions, providing training for city staff to understand the growing threat of bigoted social movements. We hope this resolution can be an example to other communities around the nation. We look forward at Western State Center to supporting your leadership in any way we can to implement these goals. Together, we can ensure that bigotry has no place in Portland. I thank you all for your leadership today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, thank you for having me here today. My name is Bhavik Singh. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Justice Resource Center, which is a statewide nonprofit that provides legal services to currently and formerly incarcerated individuals and also advocates for systemic reform. We believe that mass incarceration, including over-incarceration, mass conviction, and wrongful convictions, is in fact the greatest civil rights crisis of our time, and that we must all take ownership of it. Importantly, through our work, when we openly acknowledge how institutional racism and the shameful legacy of bigotry and prejudice of our past connect to our current policies, we quickly understand that we continue to sustain the operation of a discriminatory and wealth-sensitive justice system where those at the margins are always in the crosshairs. This sickens our communities, our state, and our nation. Until we recognize and accept the straight line that exists from our justice system to white supremacy and allow the terms of our debate to be shaped by what is politically possible, we'll only continue to take tiny steps and call them major. Unless we're willing to unapologetically stand up and support those who speak out for racial justice and equality, we will continue to foster a culture in which Black, brown, and the other will always be brutalized by our justice system. Unless we're willing to confront this racism and bigotry directly, we'll continue to bear witness to the senseless harassment, terrorizing, and killings of Black, brown, and the other. Unless we are more courageous, we will continue to experience the type of heartbreak that our community experiences because of the belligerent acts perpetuated by those hate and paramilitary groups who desire to intimidate, push out, and terrorize our fellow community members under the ideology of white supremacy. Silence, timidness, complacency from our elected leaders are far more destructive and toxic in our society than anything else. We must speak out. We must act with greater desperation. There is now a very clear right and wrong side to all of this. History will not look too kindly on those who have the power to intervene, but are choosing not to take real, meaningful action. Moreover, we must abandon our adherence to incrementalism, which has resulted in profound failure. We are currently fighting the same fundamental battles that we were fighting during the mid-20th century. There is a broad awakening and soul-searching happening in this country to racial justice issues. And we're currently involved in a ruthless fight nationally and locally in defining what is America, who is American. There are those who are pushing for very narrow and exclusive definitions, either outwardly, under the rhetoric and ideology of white supremacy, or responding through silence and inaction. We must not remain silent in this fight. We must push for the most generous and expansive definition of those who are included and embraced in our community. We must unapologetically lead with the values of compassion, dignity, and respect, and ensure as we navigate through this conversation that we're always protective of individual rights and liberties. In this moment in time, we must openly acknowledge the harms that we have caused and our failures to so many in our communities, and act with urgency on that awareness. And I want to be clear, many communities have never ever known what it means to be included and fully embraced by Oregon, and have suffered profound trauma. And with recent events, we're forced to accept a harsh reality that has existed for so long and is now in full display for all to see. And that is the legacy of white supremacy and other ideologies of hate that perpetuate systems of power and control over minority and marginalized populations are entrenched in all layers of our government, and we must now navigate through that collective trauma of unbearable magnitude that will take time to fully heal. One of the greatest forms of privilege and oppression is telling a segment of our community that the advancement of their rights and liberties may be disruptive to their political agenda or to a political agenda or a career. To that end, through this resolution, I commend your affirmation of the city's value of equity and inclusion and the recognition of the harms and trauma experienced by so many in our community. The city's condemnation of white supremacist, alt-right, and white nationalist hate groups is a powerful first step in moving an important conversation forward. The importance of elected leaders in our city to send a clear and unambiguous message that openly acknowledges the harms caused by white supremacy and groups that profess to advance this ideology cannot be overstated. And the significance of giving recognition to the experiences of so many so often ignored is a profound first step towards reconciliation and reparation. The complexity of the problem before us is great, and that will require complexity in our solutions and in our thinking. And I'm here today to affirm our commitment to working with the city in identifying and implementing concrete, holistic next steps that will work to dismantling white supremacy in our city's policies and practices. Some may say that the resolution is nothing more than lip service or an empty gesture. I would disagree. There's a difference between empty gesture and symbolism. In this instance, words matter. In this instance, symbols matter. This resolution absolutely matters. You have to tell the truth before you can get to reconciliation. And culturally, we've done a terrible job of truth-telling in this state about our history of racial inequality. This resolution is a direct response to the absence of truth and the silence that has haunted us for too long. We look forward to working with you as partners as you move forward, and I sincerely thank you for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you all three of you for being here. Appreciate it. And as Nicole had mentioned, the second panel is Alan Lazo from the Portland United Against Hate and Fair Housing Council, Maria Garcia from New Portlanders Policy Commission, and Wajdi Saeed from the Muslim Education Trust. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, and welcome, Commissioner Hartstein. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Alan Lazo. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. We're a private, nonprofit civil rights organization whose mission is to end housing discrimination and ensure equal access to housing opportunity throughout the state. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Portland United Against Hate, a coalition of more than 65 community-based and civic groups working to counteract hate in the Portland community. These groups represent many communities most impacted by the current rise of white supremacy and white nationalism today. Our coalition already has brought forward a letter of support that I'll give to the council here, thanking you all for your leadership in working to end hate in our communities and condemning the rise of white supremacy and white nationalism. Coalition members, as you know, were here just last month reporting on the work that we've all done in partnership with the city and the Office of Community and Civic Life. So you know the investment that already has been made in our community-based hate incident tracking tool and the numerous community-led resources that have been created and deployed to combat hate in our city. Portland United Against Hate Coalition members already are equipped to respond to, interrupt, and importantly prevent incidences of hate in our community. Our coalition and our numerous community members continue to stand ready as your partners to work together to create policy that changes and addresses the city's role in combating white supremacy and hate. We applaud the efforts to empower our city's employees with the necessary knowledge and training to create a Portland that embraces safety and belonging for the diverse members of our community. From my perspective, in a civil rights organization that's rooted in racial segregation and discrimination in housing, I also particularly applaud the language of the resolution, acknowledging our government's role in the systemic and institutional history of racism in housing that took place across the country, as well as right here in our city. These past institutional practices, again, many brought forth and upheld lawfully by government jurisdictions, had their roots in white supremacy. That environment also manifested itself during historical times of rising white nationalism in this country. We think about these once legal institutional practices as long gone now, maybe legal 50 years ago through that Fair Housing Act that we commemorated together last year. They have created lasting legacies of racial tensions and disparities in our communities. The intentional racial segregation and denial of opportunity of these long past policies